Welcome to Clause 8. You're watching a short clip from one of our full episodes, featuring real conversations with the leaders shaping IP.
So I guess why I thought this might be interesting to look at. So two things happened related to interviews. One, the USPTO got rid of the AFCP program. And, when it was in place, the previous data that we shared on Voice of IP showed that using the AFCP program versus not using it helped with allowances by 10% or so. They got rid of the AFCP program, and that was also followed by, increasing the production requirements of examiners, which anecdotally, at least I heard, was incentivizing examiners to, to push for more RCs so they could meet their production requirements. So that's where I came in from this. But I obviously wanted to see what was happening with that. But maybe we'll actually just start with the interviews themselves, and we'll get to allowances after. But so I'll give. So it's hard to compare. There's not enough data. It's almost it's imperfect. But you looked at the last quarter of 2024, which was before they got rid of the AFCP program in the last administration, and we compared it to the last quarter of 2025. So first, we'll do the stat of. So I'll share that the stat for, I guess, and Fran, you correct me if I'm wrong.
No.
I'm reading it wrong, but you found that in 2024, last quarter, for the applications that were allowed, 70% of them had an interview.
Yep.
Now the question is, how was that different in the last quarter of 2025? Clint, if you want to wager, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I would guess, honestly, that it didn't actually change, even with all the hoopla.
So like I said, it might be a little bit, but I guess, Fran, what was it in quarter four of 2025?
Well, and I think there are a few key things to key in on here. The first is when we're looking at the rate of interviews after final, and we compare Q4 of 2024 to Q4 of 2025. So sort of relatively looking at, how this particular change.
Well, I guess first thing we're just looking at the average number of interviews per application. So that's
okay.
Just overall. So yeah, I think your data found, if I'm looking at the same thing, it's it found it was 0.7 interviews per application in 2024, and then it was 0.42 in 2025.
That's only for interviews after final.
Oh, but
so those are average interviews per application, but we've filtered that one for only after final. So basically, I think like the way that I would phrase this is, especially when you can't see the data on the podcast, is that the USPTO had shared some data recently that said the average number of applications that have at least one interview has gone up. And that is true. So people are interviewing every application more often, if you think of it that way. And I've seen that, in the space. I think, over the last year, everybody's been touting interviews as this, great mechanism to get to allowance faster. And we see that in the data. We pulled this in November 2024. We did a webinar on interviews. And what we showed was, on average across the USPTO, if you interview an application, your allowance rate increases by 10%. So it's really considerable. And I should say by 10 percentage points. So if it were 70% without the interview, it's 80% with the interview, right? Now, so we're seeing more people interview. And I have a number of, say, corporate customers, for example, who make it a policy, interview every single matter, which I probably disagree with, because I don't think all examiners are super amenable to interviews. The data shows that. But anyway, bigger picture, we're seeing that number grow from around 30% to 35% of applications have an interview. Great. However, we're seeing fewer secondary, tertiary, et cetera, interviews. And I think that's the bigger maybe concern some folks have, is they don't have that second bite at the apple. And that often impacts the interview that might normally happen after final.
So I just want to make sure we're looking at the same data. So the chart, I guess, that you provided, and it's a little hard, but it says the average number of interviews per application for app disposed in Q24 versus Q4 2025.
Yep.
that was only for average number of final interviews.
That's only for interviews after final. That's right.
Okay, so that's interesting. That's, I guess it makes sense it went down, but I guess I'm
does.
surprised it was that high.
To begin with. And you think about there are, obviously things that skew that, like there's an application that has 5 interviews, right?
Yeah.
So it's not maybe median would be another area to look at.
And that is a little different from what Jerry Lorango's I shared. I thought it was somewhere lower, but that is interesting. I guess the other thing that you looked at is the percentage. Well, because the second chart is the percentage of final rejections that were followed by an interview.
That's right.
Which makes sense that, I guess,
that's going down.
That's going down because we're just looking at all. So if a application has multiple final rejections, only one of them was interviewed for the previous, that would count, but for this one wasn't. For that, the rate of interviews for that was about, in Q4 of 2024 was 25%.
That's right.
Clint, do you have a guess what what it is in Q4 of 2025? I don't know. I wouldn't have guessed this, but I guess if you want to wager, if you
now I'm guessing it's a big drop after Franz dropped some knowledge on us. I would say 0.1 or 13%.
So it's gone down to about 18.8%, round it to 19%. So from 25 to 19%. And so we are seeing a drop there. There's no doubt about that. And, I will say that I think some of this is intentional, right? Again, the office is trying to move with more speed, more compact prosecution. And so, they've put some limits to some degree on interviews, and they're trying to avoid scenarios where people are bringing the same arguments to the table again and again. Now, that being said, I think there are challenges because sometimes that additional interview might have different material to discuss, and it is worth doing. But overall, we're seeing that that rate of interview after final go down.